In this video, I am going to teach you how to add rate limiting to your Django REST framework. Now, in Django REST framework, rate limiting is called throttling. So basically, it's just a way of limiting the exact number of requests that a client can send to our API in a certain time period. So the explanation says, throttling is similar to permissions in that it determines if a request should be authorized. Throttles indicate a temporary state and are used to control the rate of requests that clients can make to an API. So they basically determine how much request or how many requests that a client can make to our API in a certain period of time, which we are going to set. Now we are going to be talking about three types of throttles or rate limiting. Now the reason why we're saying throttle is because in Django REST framework, that's what it's called. So the first one is called anon rate throttle. So this rate limit or this throttle basically determines the number of requests that an unauthenticated user can send to our API. That is a user that isn't logged in. This throttle determines the exact number of requests that user can send. Now it says, if I scroll up, it says the anon throttle will only ever throttle on authenticated users. The IP address of the incoming request is used to generate a unique key to throttle against. Now, what we're just going to do in order to set up is scroll to the top. Now, I would recommend that you come to this documentation page because you can just copy and follow along with me. So I will copy these two and I will head to my settings.py file. Now, since I already have REST framework specified because I had set up JWT authentication, I'll just put a comma here and scroll down and paste those in. So let's talk about what we have here. The first item is default throttle classes. And inside default throttle classes, we have REST framework.throttling anon throttle. So this is going to help us rate limit on authenticated users or throttle on authenticated users. And the other one is called REST framework.throttling user rate throttle. Now this is going to help us limit or throttle authenticated users, that is users which are logged in. Now I want you to take note of what we have here, default throttle rates. So these rates are basically going to help us define the number of requests that the user can send within a specific time period. Now here we have anon, which stands for an anonymous user or unauthenticated user, and the default is 100 per day. Now, if I head back to the documentation here, it says these rates used in default throttle rates can be specified over a period of second, minute, hour, or day. Now, in this example, they gave us 100 per day and 1,000. They gave us 100 per day for an anonymous user and 1,000 per day for an authenticated user. Now, they said the period must be specified after the slash separator using SM or SMH or D. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is this sentence here. It says, for increased clarity, extended units such as second, minute, hour, day, or even abbreviations like sec, min, HR are allowed. So what that means is that instead of passing in day here, say we wanted to limit the number of requests to, like, let's say 2 per minute. So we could do 2/minutes. So what that means is that an anonymous user can only send 2 requests to our endpoints per minute. So let's just do that setting and click. Let's just specify that and save it. So we're going to be testing it now with an endpoint which I had created here. So this is an endpoint which just returns hello world. Now, because an unauthenticated user can only make 2 requests per minute, it means if we try to make more than 2 requests to this specific endpoint, then we should get a 429 error. Now, this is URL here. So I had already opened Postman ahead of time in order to test this. So this is the endpoint which we have now. So once I click send, you can see that we have a 200 response saying message hello world to that specific endpoint. Now, if I click send again, we should get that response again 200. But notice what happens when I send a third response. So once I send a third response, you can see that we get a 429 error saying request throttled, expected available time is 44 seconds. So what that means is that for every single minute which we had specified here, we can only send two requests for an anonymous user. Now, if I go to Postman, you can see that the authorization is set to no auth. So this user is currently not logged in. So that is why we were only able to send two requests, because we came here and specified that an anonymous user can only send two requests per minute. Now you could even change this to per hour based on um, the documentation, because here they said for increased clarity, extended units such as second, minute, hour, and day, or even these abbreviations are allowed. So I'm just going to set this back to 2 per minute. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is the user throttle. Now, this is used to, like I had explained earlier, it's used to limit the number of requests that an authenticated user can make. If I actually head back to the documentation, we've talked about unknown throttle, which is here. Now, the user raised throttle, which is what we are talking about now, it helps us to limit the number of requests that an authenticated user can make. So let's say, for example, we want the user to, and a logged in user to be able to make 3 requests per minute to this specific endpoint. It would mean that if the user is logged in, they'll be able to make 3 requests to that endpoint instead of making 2 requests. And that will be 3 requests per minute instead of 2 requests per minute, which is for the unauthenticated user. So I'm going to make sure my server is running. And then I'll head back to Postman. And in a new tab which I had created, I had actually set up my authentication because I am using JWT authentication. So I have already set it up and passed in my access token. Now, once I send the first request to this endpoint, you can see it says hello world. I'll send the second request. It says hello world again. I'm going to send the third request, and notice how it still says hello world. But if I send a fourth request, you are going to see that we now get the 429 error. It says request throttled, expected available in 44 seconds. So they're basically telling us that we have been rate limited. We should try again in 44 seconds. So using this method, we've been able to see that an authenticated user can make 3 requests per minute, and an unauthenticated or anonymous user can make only 2 requests per minute. Now you could also change this to 3 requests per hour. Oops, sorry, 3 requests per hour, or depending on what your application needs. Now this really isn't, this isn't an ideal. These throttle rates which are here aren't ideal. I have just done this just for the sake of creating an example. But in a real world application, you might want to put rates that actually apply properly to your own application. Now we've talked about anon and we've talked about user throttle rates. Now the next thing that we are going to talk about is still under user throttle rates. Now imagine you wanted to create a unique policy where you want to combine two, like you wanted to create a unique policy that combines two throttle rates. Let's say, for example, you wanted a policy where users can send a maximum of two users can send a maximum of 3 requests per minute and a maximum of 15 requests per or 15 requests per hour. You could also do that. So that is combining two throttle rates in one. So the user will be able to send 3 requests per minute, a maximum of 3 requests per minute, and a maximum of 15 requests per hour. So we could definitely do that using user throttle rates. Now, from the documentation, it says an API may have multiple user throttle rates in place at the same time, which is exactly what I had just explained. And it now says to do so, override the user throttle rate and set a unique scope for each class. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy what we have here. And after copying it, I'm going to head back to my code. And inside my user app, I am going to create a new file and call it throttles.py. So what I will then do is paste this into the file. Now notice that we haven't made this import. So what I will do is I will head back to the documentation and scroll to where it is imported. So from REST framework.throttling, import user throttle. So I will just copy that and then paste it at the top. So once I paste it, what have we done here? We have created two custom classes. The first class is called burst rate throttle, and it's inheriting from this class which you have just imported. And we have set the scope or name to burst. Now we are doing the exact same thing, which is sustained rate throttle, inheriting from the class we had imported. And we are setting the scope or name to sustained. Now, what we then need to do next is head to our settings.py file and actually remove, or instead of removing it, I am going to comment this. Now, what we need to write or what we need to link to is these two classes which we had just created. So I will just write, I will link to these files using the name of the app, which is user. So I'm going to write user.throttles .throttles user.throttles and the name of the first class is burst rate throttle. I'm just going to copy that and paste it here. Now I will put a comma and paste the exact same thing, but instead of burst rate, I will paste the second one. So what exactly have we done here? We have created two new classes called burst rate throttle and sustain rate throttle, and they are inheriting from the user rate throttle. Now, what this allows us to do is it allows us to create two custom user throttle rates. Like I had said earlier, imagine you want to create two custom ratings. Sorry, you want to create two custom throttle rates for an authenticated user where they can only send a maximum of 3 requests per minute and 15 requests per hour. Now we'll do it using this method. So if I head back to the settings, if I just scroll down, the next thing that we can now do is inside the default throttle rates, we can pass in burst and sustain. So I will just copy this and explain exactly what we are doing. So I will comment out this user and paste it there. Now, the reason why we can say burst and sustain here is because we had given this our classes called, we have given these classes scope names of burst and sustained, which is why we are able to pass burst and sustained in here. Now, since we said we want the user to only be able to send 3 requests per minute, I'm going to change this to 3 requests per minute, and I'm going to change this sustained to 15 requests per hour. Now, what this allows us or allows our authenticated user to do is they're able to send 3 requests per minute and they're able to send 15 requests per hour. So I will just save it, make sure my server is running. Now, once my server is running, I will head back to Postman to test that out. So I will first of all make 3 new requests. So I'm going to make a new request. It went through. I'm going to make another request. It went through. And I'll make a third request. It's also going to go through because we had already set in our settings.py for boss that they can send 3 requests, maximum of 3 per minute. So if I try to send a fourth, notice what it's going to tell us. It's going to tell us request was throttled, and it's going to tell us to wait 42 more seconds. Now, in order to actually test this sustained, we actually are going to change the rate a bit. So let's say we want to allow the user make a maximum request of 10 per minute, and we want to set the maximum request per hour to be 15. What that will enable us to do is it will actually enable us to test both rate limits soon. So what I will do is I am going to make, instead of passing in 3 here, I'm going to make it a maximum of 10 requests per minute, and I will make this 15. I'll leave this as 15 requests per hour. So what that will enable us do is we are going to be able to test this burst limit, which will allow us only make 10 requests per minute. Now we're then going to wait another minute and try to make multiple requests until we reach 15. Now at that point where we reach 15, this rate limit is going to kick in and tell us that we can only make a maximum of 15 requests per hour, and it will tell us to wait some certain seconds. So I will just head back to Postman and I will keep sending, I'll send a request to this endpoint 10 times just to show you how, just to show you that this request works. I'm just going to do that now. 10. So at this point, I have made 10 requests to this specific endpoint. Now, once I send an 11th request, notice how it says we have to wait 31 seconds. So I will just wait 31 seconds and try again. So at this point, we have already made 10 requests and we have five more requests left for this specific hour. So after the 31 seconds, I will try to make five more requests and you are going to see how this specific rate limit prevents us from making more than five extra requests because we only have a maximum of 15 requests per hour. So it has been 31 seconds. So I will head back to Postman and try to make requests again. So I'm going to send the first one. The first one went through. So that's one, two, three, four, and then five. So you can see now that it says request was throttled, expected available in 3,429 seconds. So this tells us that we have been rate limited and we have surpassed the number of requests we can make per hour. Now, if we calculate this in seconds, you'll see that we have about 50 something minutes left before we can try again. So that shows that we have actually been rate limited by this. So that is how you can combine two different user throttle rates together. So in this example, an authenticated user can only send 10 requests per minute and they can only send 15 requests per hour. Now, obviously, this isn't the best throttle rate ever, but you can customize it depending on your application needs and your application, scope and size. So that is how to set default throttle rate in your project. Now, the last throttle rate which we are going to talk about is called scoped throttle rate. Now the scoped raise throttle. Now the scoped raise throttle class can be used to restrict access to specific parts of the API. Let's say, for example, you have different endpoints. Let me go to my URL. So let's say, for example, you have like different endpoints. What you could do is you can use this scoped rate throttle to only rate limit specific views or specific endpoints. So that is exactly how this specific um, throttle works. So it says this throttle will only be applied in the view that is being accessed. So yeah, it will only be applied if the view that is being accessed includes a .throttle scope property. Now this is the unique throttle key will then be formed by concatenating the scope of the request with the unique user ID or IP address. So this is basically how it works. For example, in a class-based view, once you have created your class, you then set the throttle scope to contact, or if you had already created any throttle scope before. By the way we've been doing it, we had already set the default throttle class and the default throttle rates. So this will automatically be applied to every single view that exists within our class. If you only want to throttle specific endpoints, that is when you make use of the scoped rate throttle. That is all we're going to talk about in this tutorial. You learned how to limit or rate limit the exact number of requests that a user can make to certain endpoints. Now, there is something that I would like to call your attention to. It is good to note that this method of throttling is only best for like certain business logic in your application. It's not actually the best way to protect your application against like DDoS attacks or hackers. Now, I will show you an example, an explanation of what is written here. It says the application level throttling that REST framework provides should not be considered a security measure or protection against brute force or denial of service attacks. Deliberately malicious actors will always be able to spoof IP origins. In addition to this, the built-in throttling implementation are implemented using Django cache framework. Now let's first talk about the first sentence. So what they basically told us is that this isn't the best approach to preventing hackers from like sending DDoS attacks to your API. You might want to use external or third-party services to make this better. So something like Microsoft Azure, they have a DDoS protection service. AWS also has one, or you could even use Cloudflare. So these are providers that actually have large infrastructure in place to prevent DDoS attacks and protects some of these attacks by hackers. So this isn't the best way. It's just best for like let's say business logic in your Django application. So let's say for example, you only want authenticated users or specific users which have purchased like some item to be able to make requests to an endpoint. That is when this is best. Now, it also says something. In addition to this, the built-in throttling implementations are implemented using Django cache framework and use non-atomic operations to determine the rate request, which may sometimes result in some fuzziness. Now, it's important to note that in order for this rate limiting to actually occur, Django uses caching. So it caches the requests and IP addresses and it assigns them a specific wait time if they have broken the rate limit. Now, it's important to note that by default, Django's inbuilt cache framework is used. When you are going to production, you might want to use better caches like Redis, for example. So when you are deploying this to a production level environment, it is important to use Redis because Redis is an industry standard cache which is well optimized. But when you are working in your development environment, you can see that we hadn't specified the cache framework or the cache settings. But when you are going to deployment, when you're deploying it to a production environment, it is important for you to set up caching. And there's actually something here called setting up the cache. So you want to take a look at this documentation. So I'm going to leave a link to this documentation page in the description of this video. That is all we're going to talk about in this video. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask a question in the comment section and I will reply you. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.